So let's talk about masking for a second. So in ZBrush, when you are sculpting on the surface, let's go ahead and grab a clay buildup brush. So you can change this to, see here. So you can sculpt on the surface, and there might be a point where you need to sculpt really close to an area but not actually affect that area. And you can mask those areas out. And the way to do that is to access the masking brush. If you have any of your draw, so if you have click draw here or the Q on the keyboard, and you're in the sculpting brush mode, if you click Control, you'll see that your cursor changes to a yellow and it says mask. So I'm going to click and drag. Let me change this first. By default, it should be under freehand under stroke here. So we can kind of click and drag like this, and now you can see the surface is gray, and that means that it is inactive. So I can come over here and sculpt, and I can sculpt all around this edge, and I can't sculpt on the interior there. If I want to sculpt in this area now but not sculpt on the exterior area here, I hold Control, click to the outside, that inverts my mask, and now I can sculpt to the inside but not the outside, like that. Okay, so this is really beneficial because we can do some other really interesting things, like I can hold Control, can drag a mask, Control click to the outside, then I can click W and then unlock my gizmo, hit this little this icon here, which centers my gizmo to the unmasked area, which will be here. I can reorient my gizmo if I want to, so I rotate like this. I can reorient my gizmo to the direction that I want to manipulate this, lock it back, and I can just drag chunks of the surface out. I can scale these in, so you can get some interesting shapes there. And then to disengage your mask, hold Control, click drag to the outside, and that will release it. So Q again for my brush, and we have all kinds of really cool things we can do. So I'm going to hold Control for my mask, and I'm going to change some of my strokes up here. So if I click Control and do a, let's see, we can do a drag dot. This has to do with alpha. So if I have drag dot and select an alpha, so let's pick this one and click, you'll see that it's dragging that kind of masked out area. I'll let go, then I start to sculpt. You can see that it's sculpting around that alpha. We can do the same similar thing with drag rectangle, which means I can drag and pull out my alpha to the size I want it, and then I can sculpt, and you can see that that mask is affecting the surface there. And so when you create an alpha or you get an alpha from somewhere, just be aware it works on a black and white gradient. So the areas that are white, so if I click on here again, let's see if I can grab another one. Let's see. Let's try this one. Oh, wrong one. So the areas that are white will pop out more than the areas that are gray or black. So the darker the alpha, the less your brush is going to affect it. So you can see there. And the lighter or more white the alpha, the more it's going to be affected by the brush. Okay. So let's look at a few more things that we can do as far as controlling this alpha or this masking brush. So I'm going to hold Control. I'm going to just select a circle here, that's fine. But for my alpha, I'm actually, let's change this. Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to go to stroke. We're going to look at a few more of these strokes. So if you click spray and now you click your alpha, you'll see that that spray is kind of like an old school Photoshop paint spray can brush. It just kind of sprays it all. I don't really use this one that much, you know, very sparingly, because it's just not something that, you know, feels very useful for this, for using masks. I like to be a little more controlled. So let's look at the, so we did rectangle, so here's a rectangle, so if you click and drag, so this is dragging a rectangle with the alpha that we had selected, but if I change this to alpha off and I drag rectangle, I can get a rectangular alpha, and I can just keep clicking and dragging and getting the shapes I want. Now if there's a part of this that I do not want selected, as I'm holding Control, if I press down alternate drag, you'll see that my box is a lighter gray. Let go. And so now we have deselected. So I'm going to Control click inverse, go to my gizmo, I'm going to lock it to center. I'm going to reorient it like so. Now if I scale in, you got a pretty interesting shape there. And these edges, you don't really have to worry about those right now. We're just kind of playing. But the higher resolution your mesh, the less that will visually stand out like that. And this, again, this is just a way of creating shapes. There are also other ways to create these shapes. Also, let's play around a little bit more. So if we wanted to get some more control on our shapes, so I'm going to click on my rectangle. So you can see right now when I click drag rectangle, I'm pulling from this upper left and then down to the right, and you see it masks out. I'm going to deselect that. If I wanted this to maintain a square and not just a rectangle, I click on square, and now when I pull this out, it's a perfect square. And if I wanted this to center from my location instead of pulling out from the right down, so I can click on my object, click and pull, and you can see that it pulls out from that center point. That comes in really handy with mechanical shapes, so I can change this to circle and do the same thing because I have that set. So this is really handy. So for instance, if I want to make a ring, kind of a donut shape, click drag, then hold alternate, click in the middle, click drag, let go, and now I have that shape, and I'm going to pull that in. So just kind of playing around. We can also you know, sculpt in that area as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get another Dynamesh object here just so we have a fresh start. And one more thing, so if you want to have some custom shapes with your masking, we're going to click on curve. You have lasso, which is, you know, you can do this kind of thing here, which is fine. I like to have a little bit more control over my line, so I'm going to use lasso, and, or excuse me, I want to click on my stroke type, click on curve, and this time when I click and pull the curve, you see that I have a line that appears to be very straight, and it has a gradient to one side. The gradient side is the side at which your masking is going to take effect. So if I drag here and let go, you see that everything on the side of the gradient is now masked. And so that's very handy if you need, you know, like a straight line mask. But you can also control that a little bit more. This is where having some finger dexterity comes in handy. So I'm going to click drag to about right here, and then I'm going to tap alternate and then drag, and then I have a curve, and I can let go. Got a nice curve, and we can do this. So I can click, say here, Alt, click, Alt, let go. And you can see there's some artifacts up here, but you could easily adjust your mask over here to freehand, and you can come and mask out those areas. And so then you still have the mask you're looking for. So again, let's go back to the curve. So this time I'm going to, if I want a more of an angular shape, I can click, and instead of hitting alternate, which will give me a curve, I double click alternate. That gives me an angle. So click here, double click, down, let go, and I have a angular shape. So that comes in very handy whenever you're creating shapes. So for instance, this is another way that you can use this. I'm going to go ahead and draw out a mask like so. Let's say I need a very unique shape here. So I can go to curve. By the way, depending on the direction you drag this curve, so if I drag here up, you see my curve points to the left. If I start from the top down, my curve points to the right. So that can come in handy whenever you are making shapes. So I'm going to click to the left and drag to the right. And as I do that, I'm going to tap Alt one time and pull down. Now this time, before I let go, I'm going to hold alternate. That will make this a negative mask. And I'll let go, and you'll slice the top off here. This time I'm going to cut a curve into the bottom. So I'm going to click from the bottom. Oh, let's back up. Let's click. Let's see if we can get it this way. There we go. So click to the right, and let's just do an angle. So I'm going to click, double click, pull down, hold Alt, let go. Pretty good shape. This time I'm going to click bottom, pull up, and I'm going to go here, tap Alt, pull curve, and see I didn't hold Alt, so it masked off that area. So Control Z. Let's do it one more time. Click, Alt, before I let go, hold Alt, so give me a negative, and there is a cut. So that's the way to control the curvature. So one last thing, and this comes in very handy with your masks, is whenever you place shapes or whatever. Say for instance I want a cut shape, so I'm going to click and say I want this cut shape, but I don't want it in the location that I have here, or this mask. So I'm going to hold spacebar. That lets me slide this mask cut wherever I want it. So I'm going to place it here, let go, and then I'm going to do another one. So I'm going to click, drag down. This time I'm going to double click, pull, hold spacebar, we'll float it here, let go. And so now you can see I can get some very complicated shapes. Say for instance I want a circular shape kind of cut in here. I will go back to circle, make sure that my center and square is turned on. I'm going to click here, drag out, and before I let go I'm going to hold alternate, let go, and it's going to mask out or demask the area, but it also demask this backside here. So those are some ways to mask. If you want to adjust your mask, you can go over into your tool set, click on masking, and we're just going to look at these features up here at the top. So we have inverse, which will invert your mask, which is the same as holding control and tapping to the outside. Clear, which erases your mask, which if you hit Control and click drag to the outside does the same thing. Mask all just masks the entire object or subtool. But these are the ones that are a little bit more usable here. So we have blur mask, so I can click blur and you can see my mask is starting to blur, which means if I sculpt over here, you'll see that it's more of a slight mild transition into the mask, which is helpful. We can sharpen our mask, which will harden the edges, so if we need it more mechanical. We have grow, which will start to push our mask out. Looks like it's blurring, but it's pushing the mask out so we can grow. And if you have a lower polygon, it won't blur quite like this. So, and then we can hit sharpen mask once we've grown it out, and we can kind of control our mask that way. If you need sharp edges, you'd have to go back and cut in some sharp edges. And then we have shrink mask, which will bring your mask down, then sharpen it again, shrink it in, sharpen it. So there's just some ways to adjust and play with your masking. So using this masking tool and using the stroke and alpha is a very powerful way to control your masking.